Hi there guys! This week we are going to be talking about boats, and one of the science topics that we talk about when we're talking about boats is sink and float. We've done some sink and float experiments this year. We're going to do a little bit more with our sink and float today. So if you have the materials at home and you want to do it on your own with a tub of water and the materials on the sheet, you can do that, or you can just watch the video and follow along. So the key for this is that you need to make a prediction. So if you haven't made your predictions yet, stop the video right now, go in and mark off whether you think these things are going to sink or float. That's the first column, is prediction. So I'm going to look at it, I'm going to say, do I think a rubber ball is going to sink or float? Mark off which one. And then once you've made all of your predictions, then you can come back and watch the video and record what actually happens in the last column. So I'm going to start off with a rubber ball. That's the first thing on our list. So I have a rubber ball. Do you think it's going to sink or float? I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it in my water. It sank right down to the bottom. So did you get it right? Go to your sheet. Don't change your prediction. A good scientist knows that sometimes you're going to get things wrong. You're going to get the wrong answer. So now you're going to go in and you're going to go to actual and you're going to write what actually happened. Mark off sink for what happened with our rubber ball. Next up, I have a wooden block. You can use a pattern block. I don't have pattern blocks at home, but I did have this little wooden block dinosaur figure. You could also use other wooden blocks that you might have at home. So, do you think it's going to sink or float? Let's find out. It's staying right on top of the water. It's not going down to the bottom. Did you think it was going to sink, or did you get it right? Go to your sheet, mark off actual under float. Nice work. Next up, we have spoon. Now, it's important to note that it is a plastic spoon, not a metal spoon. And I would be interested to find out whether it's a difference in the material that the spoon is made out of. So I'm using a plastic spoon right now, but if you want to try it out at home and see what happens with a metal spoon, go right for it. So our plastic spoon, sink or float? It is floating right on the top. It's hard to see because my spoon is clear, but you can see it floating right up at the top, not down with that rubber ball there. Mark it off on your sheet for the actual. Don't change your prediction, remember. Go to actual and write float, or mark off float on your sheet. Next up, we have rubber band. What do you think? It's got a big old hole in it. Do you think it'll stay at the top, or do you think it's going to sink down to the bottom? It sank down to the bottom, all the way down at the bottom. Go ahead and mark off that it sank. Put an X in that box. Next up, we have toothpick. I didn't have a little toothpick. I had this big long skewer, so I'm going to use it. It's the same idea. It's made out of wood. It's staying right up there at the top, floating. So go to your sheet for toothpick, mark off that our toothpick is floating at the top with the spoon and the wooden block. Those are our things that are floating so far. Next up, we have crayon. Do you think it's going to sink down to the bottom, or do you think it's going to float up there at the top with the other wooden things and the plastic spoon? Let's find out. Went right down to the bottom. Our crayon is another one for sink. So go to crayon, actual, mark off that sank down to the bottom of our tub. Penny. Do you think it's going to sink or float? What do you think? Do you know boats that are made out of metal? Do they sink down to the bottom? They don't. Let's see what happens with the penny. The penny sank. Mark it off on your sheet. And then think about it. How do they get those boats that are made out of metal to not sink down to the bottom? The penny is flat. Do you think it has something to do with the shape of the metal and how they form the boat that helps it float on the surface? Because think about it. If they make a boat out of metal and it doesn't float on the surface, it's not going to be a boat, right? That doesn't serve its purpose. So how do they do that? That's one of the things that we'll talk about and learn about this week. Next up, we have a paper clip, another metal object. I'm going to put that in and see if it sinks or floats. Right down to the bottom, just like our penny, mark it off, sink, all the way down. Next up, I have tin foil. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that it fits inside of my tub. Before I put it in, what do you think? Is it going to sink or do you think it's going to float on the top? I'm going to take my toothpick out so that I have enough room in here for it. You ready? It's floating on top. Now, it's flat, but it's not sinking down to the bottom like the penny did when it was flat. I wonder if this is one of those things, since we can take it and change its shape, if we can maybe answer some questions. Do you think if I crumple this up into a tight ball that it'll still float? Let's see. I'm going to change the shape and see if it changes our answer. So far though, tin foil is float. So if you want to mark it off, float. Interesting, even crumpled up like that, it still floats on the top. So changing its shape didn't make a difference. So maybe it's the type of metal that they use to build boats. Interesting observations. Next up, last one on the sheet, my die. Sink or float? Right down to the bottom. Go ahead and mark it off for sink. Now, it says, are there any that you can make do both? Now, I'm going to show you one that we can make do both. The plastic spoon. If I push it down to the bottom, it stays at the bottom, so it's no longer floating, it is sinking. And the reason is the shape. This section here of the spoon, where it can get filled up with water, if water fills up that space, it's going to hold it down. Now think about that. Also, I can show you with, I have a plastic cup. Plastic cup, as long as it's upright, is going to float. But the problem, and this happens with boats too, is if it goes on its side, it'll float for a little while, but slowly it will start to fill with water. And this is true of boats too. If a boat gets a leak and starts filling with water and that empty space in a boat gets filled up, it's going to sink down to the bottom like my cup just did. So these are some of the things that people have to think about when they're designing and building boats. Now, did you make any observations about what types of materials sank and float? Did all the plastic things float at the top? Did all the wood things float at the top? Now, some metal things sank, like our penny and our paper clip, but the tin foil floated. So that's a material that, depending on the type of metal, it can change what it does. Just like when we were learning about magnets, not all metals are attracted to magnets, right? Only iron. So it's special, different types of metal. Plastic, it's all types of plastic seem to float. So hopefully you had fun predicting and finding out the answers to these sink and floats. Maybe if you have the chance, you can go around your house and see if you can find other things and test them out. Go find a pencil, some toys, get a Lego man, see if he sinks or floats. If you find out anything interesting, go ahead and share it with us.